Hello, dear viewers. Namaskar. Welcome to Moksha Media. You are with Moksha Hiremat. Most of persons interested in Kannada literature know the work Shabdamani Darpana. But if one asks them who wrote Shabdamani Darpana, they would be stuttered. Of course, Keshiraaja wrote Shabdamani Darpana. It is Kannada grammar's classical text. Keshiraaja belonged to the first part of the 13th century AD. Keshiraaja was the son of Mallikarjuna. I hope you know the scholastic poet who compiled Sukti Sudharanava. Of course, Sukti Sudharanava is even today a reference book for the lovers of Kannada literature and language. So Keshiraaja was the son of such a compiler and scholastic poet. Of course, Keshiraaja belonged to scholastic family. Only we get a little bit of information for his places belonged to. Of course, Keshiraaja was a classical grammar writer. He was, in the strict sense, a grammarian, that too Kannada grammarian. Keshiraaja brought into Kannada grammar what was not there in Kannada at that time. Especially, he did a classical work on the topics of grammar, and he tried his best to introduce different grammatical aspects which were not there at that time in Kannada language. He brought it into Kannada, especially from Sanskrit. Some of the grammatical points were not there in Kannada literature as it was a Dravidian language. Dravidian language did not have some of the points which Sanskrit had, and Sanskrit did not have some of the points which Dravidian languages have, which Kannada has. Of course, Keshiraaja, being a well-versed in Sanskrit, came to know some of the points which were not there in Kannada language. So he brought them into Kannada and gave a new shape to Kannada grammar, literature and language. He did it scientifically. Of course, Kannada language didn't have some of the letters, but Keshiraaja introduced them into Kannada alphabet. Now we say we have 52 letters in Kannada language. Of course, only 33 letters belonged to pure Kannada grammar. But anyhow, due to introduction of some of the letters which were not there in Kannada at that time, the alphabet number has risen to 52 letters. Some of them are let off, some of them are brought in. Of course, that is common in any language. Kannada and Sanskrit are not an exception to it. Shabdamani Darpana is a magnum opus of Keshiraaja. He wrote Shabdamani Darpana in a different way. He wrote about 357 formulas plus other 6, totally 337 formulas plus 6, totally 343 formulas. He composed 343 formulas in a poetic way. He framed the formula in the 4-lined poems. Each formula is a poem. Generally, grammar is a prosaic, but Keshiraaja made it an interesting one. If you go through Shabdamani Darpana, you don't feel that you are studying grammar. You feel that you are studying poetic grammar. That is what Keshiraaja showed it in his Shabdamani Darpana. Keshiraaja composed those 343 poetic formulas under the different grammar titles. He talked of alphabet, that is, he categorized them into vowels, semi-vowels, structured consonants, unstructured consonants, semi-consonants, and etc. etc. In one way or another way, Keshiraaja Sanskritized Kannada language in his own way. But that doesn't mean he has completely changed Kannada grammar. He gave a due respect to Kannada grammar, culture, literature and language. By sustaining those things, he introduced the things which were not there in Kannada at that time. Of course, it is said that he also wrote Cholapala Charite, Subhadra Harana, Kirata, Prabodha Chandra, and etc. etc. He mentioned it also in his Shabdamani Darpana. But there is a confusion regarding these works. And of course, some scholars feel that they might be written by his father, Mallikarjuna. But anyhow, these 4 works are not found even today. That is why that a little bit of confusion is continued. But even those 4 books are not found, but the importance of Keshiraaja's Shabdamani Darpana has made him has made him the greatest one in Kannada, in the history of Kannada language and literature. Even after Keshiraaja's period, modern linguists also studied that Shabdamani Darpana. For example, G. Garrett reviewed it and published it in 1758, I think. And the famous Reverend Ferdinand Kittle also reviewed it, revised it, and published it in 1763. So even European scholars studied that Shabdamani Darpana and brought out what is there in that Shabdamani Darpana, and by that they also gave a new shape to Kannada language and literature. It shows to what extent that Shabdamani Darpana created history in the history of Kannada language and literature. Even today, the persons who want to study Kannada language and literature could not go without studying that Shabdamani Darpana, without going through that Shabdamani Darpana. To that extent, that Shabdamani Darpana created its own niche in the history of Kannada language and literature. Of course, learning a grammar and studying a grammar is a prosaic thing, but Keshiraaja made it an interesting one. You do not feel that you are studying grammar. Without feeling you are studying grammar, you study grammar. That is the speciality of Keshiraaja. He formed the formulas in 4 lines of poetic way. Those 4-lined poems are called Kanda Padyas in Kannada. So he formed formulas in the way of Kanda Padyas, 4-lined poems. Until that time, that effort was not made. But of course, Nagavarma did it in another way. He took some of the examples from Nagavarma, the another great grammarian who came before Keshiraaja. So that is why, if anyone wants to study Kannada grammar, language, literature and culture, he should refer Shabdamani Darpana. Of course, he might have written that book only, but it made him the greatest one in the history of Kannada language and literature. That shows the importance of Shabdamani Darpana. But even today, the students of Kannada literature feel that understanding Shabdamani Darpana is not that much easy. They feel it very difficult. But the European scholars tried it and got success in understanding it, and not only that, they wrote articles on the Shabdamani Darpana in English also. For instance, G. Garrett and Kittle and others also. So, it shows to what extent Shabdamani Darpana influenced the others, and to what extent it becomes a book of immutability in Kannada language and literature. So, when we want to know something about Kannada language, literature and grammar, etc., one should refer that Shabdamani Darpana. So, this is what we have to bear in mind while studying Kannada language and literature. But most of the persons belong to new generation don't know the name of Shabdamani Darpana. Even if they know the title of Shabdamani Darpana, they don't know the name of the composer, the name of the person who wrote that work. So it is a classical, grammatical, grammar work. It is inevitable even today. You can't go without referring and studying and understanding Shabdamani Darpana. And scholars like D.L. Narasimhachar, Shivanand and others wrote commentaries in modern days, and they tried their best to make Shabdamani Darpana to understand in an easy way. So they try to simplify what is there in Shabdamani Darpana. But even today, students of Kannada literature, that even postgraduate students of Kannada literature, feel it very difficult to understand the contents of Shabdamani Darpana. These things show to what extent the Shabdamani Darpana is inevitable, to what extent it has created a history in Kannada language and literature. This is what we have to bear in our mind while knowing the importance of Kannada grammar, language, literature and culture. So I feel I have brought a truth to home. Share it, subscribe it, and see you in the next episode. Namaskar.